My son asked for a simple birthday cake, but his father dismissed the request and made him feel ashamed for asking. The very next day, my husband proudly bought an expensive iPad for his nephew. After witnessing the painful difference in how the two children were treated, my father withdrew his $7.5 million investment, and everything began to change. Victor's face changed when he looked down at that folded document. And I want you to understand what I mean by changed, because I'd been married to that face for 11 years, and I knew every version of it. I knew his negotiating face, all warmth and teeth. I knew his golf course face, easy and loose. I knew the face he wore when he wanted something from my father, which was patient and respectful and completely, expertly fake. This wasn't any of those. This was the face of a man watching the floor disappear. "What is this?" he said, not a question. His voice had gone flat, stripped of the smugness it carried down the stairs 10 minutes earlier. "Read it," my father said. I was standing in the doorway with a dish towel still in my hand, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should put it down, that this moment deserved both my hands free. Ethan was upstairs. I'd heard his door close 20 minutes ago. Soft, the way an 8-year-old closes a door when he's trying not to be noticed at all. Victor unfolded the paper. I watched his eyes move across it once, fast, the way you read something you don't want to be true. Then again, slower. "You're pulling the investment," he said. "I'm reviewing it," my father said. "There's a difference, and whether you get to keep that difference is entirely up to you." Victor set the paper down like it had gotten hot in his hands. "Richard, this is, the Whitmore deal closes in 9 days. If you pull funding now, I lose the deal and the deposit. That's not a review. That's a demolition. Then I'd start thinking very carefully," my father said, "about what you're going to say to me next. I need to back up because none of this makes sense without the cake. I married Victor Reyes when I was 29 and he was 34. And for the first 3 years, I would have told you, without hesitation, that I'd married a good man who was simply careful with money. That's the word I used. Careful. I used it so often it stopped meaning anything. The way a word does when you need it to keep meaning something. Victor ran a mid-sized logistics consulting firm, Reyes Meridian, that he'd built from almost nothing over about a decade. And I do mean almost, because the truth I didn't fully absorb until much later was that almost nothing had actually meant a $7.5 million capital injection from my father, Richard Calloway, 4 years into our marriage, structured as a convertible note with a board observer seat attached. My father had made his money in commercial real estate over 30-some years, was semi-retired, and treated investing in his son-in-law's company the way he treated most things, as a favor wrapped in due diligence, extended once, expected never to need repeating. Victor never called it a favor. He called it the partnership. He'd correct me, gently, at dinner parties, if I ever said the word loan. It's an investment, not a loan. There's a difference. He was right, technically. There's always a difference, technically, right up until there isn't one that matters. Ethan was born the year after the investment closed. He was, from the very beginning, a quiet kid. Not sad quiet, just observant quiet, the kind of child who watches a room before he steps into it. He liked drawing bridges, oddly specific ones, with cable towers and suspension lines he'd copied out of library books. He was gentle with animals and careful with his baby cousin Liam, who was 3 years younger and considerably louder, and I used to think, watching the two of them, that Ethan would grow up to be the kind of adult who apologizes to furniture when he bumps into it. The red flags were there early. I can see that now with the particular clarity that only comes after you've stopped needing to protect the version of your life where you didn't see them. There was the birthday, 3 years back, when Ethan was 5, and he'd wanted a $40 remote control car from a catalog, and Victor had said, in front of my sister and her husband, "We don't reward wanting things by buying them," and Ethan had gone very still and very polite for the rest of the party, the way he always did after Victor said something like that, like stillness was a kind of armor he'd already learned to put on. There was the time Victor described his own childhood to a group of my coworkers at a dinner, growing up in Fresno, a single mother working 2 jobs, learning financial discipline the hard way, and I'd watched him tell it with such conviction, such warmth, that half the table had tears in their eyes by the end, and I believed for years this story explained everything about him. I told it back to people myself, at other dinners, proud of him in a way that now feels like it belonged to someone else. It explained the carefulness, it explained the discomfort with waste. What it didn't explain, though I didn't let myself ask the question directly for a long time, was why the discipline only ever seemed to apply to Ethan, and never once, in 11 years, to Victor himself. Not to the golf club dues, not to the leased BMW, not to the watch he'd bought himself the same month he told Ethan a $40 toy car was throwing money away. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself for years, actually, that it was nothing, that this was simply what it looked like when a man who genuinely struggled growing up tried to instill values in his own child, even if his execution sometimes ran cold. I made excuses out of raw material that, in hindsight, wasn't really there. That's the loop you get stuck in. You notice the strange detail, you rationalize it into something bearable, and you keep living inside the bearable version, because the alternative requires you to admit you built a life on a foundation you never actually inspected. The cake broke the loop. Not because it was the worst thing Victor ever did, it wasn't, not even close, as things turned out, but because I finally, actually watched my son's face when he asked for something that cost $26, and I watched what happened to that face when the answer came back as rage instead of a simple no. The morning after the blow-up in the kitchen, I woke up early, before either of them, them, and sat at the table with my coffee going cold and made myself replay it in order, the way you'd lay out photographs on a table to see if they told a story you hadn't let yourself read before. Ethan, holding the flyer like it might tear if he wasn't careful. Mom said we might be able to get this one. Victor's chair screeching, the windows seeming to shake, though I know now that was probably just my own pulse doing the shaking. My body translating fear into architecture because the alternative, that a man could make an entire house feel unsafe over $26, was too much to hold on to directly. Ethan's hand rising halfway to his face. He didn't cry. I keep coming back to that because I think if he'd cried, I might have moved faster, might have understood sooner what I was looking at. Instead, he did something worse than crying. He went still and watched his father the way you watch whether you now know can turn on you, carefully, permanently, like he was filing something away that he was never going to be able to unfile. He's old enough to learn money doesn't grow on trees. And then my father in the hallway, still holding Ethan's wrapped present, saying one word, interesting. I didn't understand that morning just how much weight my father had put behind that single word. I understand now. My father was a man who spent 30 years reading rooms before he put $1 into them, and he'd just watched, in real time, the man he'd put $7.5 million behind lose control over a bakery flyer in front of his own child. That's not a data point my father forgets. That's a data point my father files, the same careful, permanent way Ethan had just learned to file his father's rage. We skipped Ethan's birthday completely. I want to say that plainly, without softening it, because I softened it for months afterward, told myself we'd make it up to him, told myself a missed birthday wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't the end of the world, but it was the end of something. The end of me being able to tell myself Victor's carefulness with money was really about money at all. Instead, we drove 40 minutes to Victor's sister's house for his nephew Liam's birthday. Ethan sat in the back in his one good shirt, navy blue, buttons he'd insisted on doing up himself, the shirt he'd picked out for a birthday that had already quietly ceased to exist. Nobody in that car said the word birthday. I kept opening my mouth to say something and closing it again because I didn't know what sentence could follow it that wouldn't detonate the whole car. At the party, there were balloons in Liam's favorite shade of green, a rented bounce house sagging slightly in the heat, a Bluetooth speaker playing a kid's playlist too loud for the yard. Victor disappeared for a few minutes into the house. When he came back out, he was holding a glossy gift bag up over his head like a trophy at a ceremony, and the whole yard turned to look, because that's what a gift bag held up like a trophy is designed to do. He pulled out an iPad Pro, not the base model. I recognized the box because I'd priced them myself once, half joking, when Ethan asked about a tablet for his drawing. This was the $200 version, the one with the pencil included. For Liam, Victor announced, grinning at the whole yard. My nephew deserves the best. People clapped. Someone, I think it was Victor's brother-in-law, laughed and said Victor was too generous, and Victor laughed back, easy, warm, the golf course face, soaking in every second of it like a man standing in sunlight he'd arranged for himself. I watched Ethan. I made myself watch him, because some instinct told me that if I looked away, I'd be choosing not to see something I badly needed to see. He stared at the iPad for maybe 4 seconds. Then he looked down at the grass, and he did not look up again for the rest of the party. Not when the cake came out, chocolate, 3 tiers, from a real bakery, easily $150. Not when the kids ran through the bounce house. Not when his own father called across the yard for him to come say hi to your cousin. He said hi. He sat back down. He looked at the grass. My father was standing near the patio doors the entire time, a paper plate of food he wasn't eating balanced in one hand. I didn't understand what he was doing until much later. He was doing what he always did before he moved real money. He was watching, quietly, for as long as it took to be sure. About 10 minutes after the iPad moment, he set his plate down, walked out to the side yard, and made a phone call. I didn't follow him. I didn't ask. When he came back inside, he sat down next to me on the porch step and asked, in the same tone he might have used to ask where the bathroom was, where Victor kept his laptop charger. I told him the office, second drawer. I didn't ask why. I think some part of me already knew that asking would only slow down something that badly needed to move. In the days right after the party, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, actually paying attention to the small financial choices Victor made in front of other people versus the ones he made in front of just us. I noticed, for the first time consciously, that Victor tipped generously at restaurants when we were with other couples, and got quietly irritated about the tip when it was just the 3 of us. I noticed he'd donated $500 to Ethan's school auction the year before, publicly, his name read aloud from a podium, the same year he'd told me our family couldn't justify a $60 winter coat for Ethan until it went on clearance. None of this was new information exactly. It was information I'd simply never allowed myself to add up before. 2 days after the party, I found an email open on the shared family laptop. Victor had forgotten to log out, which was itself unusual, because Victor was meticulous about his devices in a way that, again, I'd filed for years under careful. It was a message to someone named Priya Nair. Subject line, Q3 draw. Keep this off the RM books for now. I told myself it was nothing. Businesses have all kinds of internal shorthand, and I am not a numbers person, and off the books could mean 100 boring things. A personal reimbursement, a tax timing issue, anything. I closed the laptop. I told myself it was nothing for exactly one more day. The next evening, my father called me, not Victor, and asked carefully respectfully whether I knew a woman named Priya Nair. I said the name sounded familiar. I'd seen it in an email. And there was a pause on the line that told me more than words would have. She's Reyes Meridian's bookkeeper, my father said. I had my forensic accountant reach out to her yesterday as part of the review. Marcus Delacroix, you haven't met him, but he's done work for me for almost 20 years, and he doesn't get spooked easily. He called me this morning sounding spooked. My stomach did the thing it does now, the dropping thing, the thing I'd later learn to recognize as my body understanding a sentence before my mind caught up to it. Spooked how? I said. There's a pattern, my father said. I'd rather Marcus explain it properly than have me guess at it over the phone and get it wrong. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept running the word pattern over in my head, turning it like a stone, trying to guess its edges before I had to hold the actual shape of it. I thought about the watch. I thought about the BMW lease, which Victor had always described as a business necessity, client-facing, even though I couldn't remember the last time a client had ridden in that car. I thought about how easily the word careful had covered for all of it, for years, without me ever once asking what, exactly, Victor was being careful toward. Marcus Delacroix came to the house 2 days later. He was a small, precise man in his 60s, the kind of person who brings his own folder even when you've told him he doesn't need to, and he sat at our kitchen table, the same table where Victor had stood over a $26 cake flyer, and laid out, page by page, 18 months of what he called draw discrepancies. I've been doing forensic accounting for 22 years, he told me, not unkindly, the way you'd explain a diagnosis to someone you didn't want to frighten more than necessary. What I'm looking at here isn't a crime, Mrs. Reyes. Not yet. Not on its own. It's a pattern of personal expenses routed through business accounts and reclassified after the fact. Golf memberships, a leased vehicle, a watch purchase in November, categorized as client development and equipment. Individually, any one of these could be an honest mistake. Together, over 18 months, they're not. I asked him, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. How much? Just over $310,000, he said, that I can document cleanly. There may be more. I'd want another month to be certain. I attempted, that same week, to fix things quietly. I confronted Victor myself, alone. No lawyers, no father, just the two of us in the kitchen, because some stubborn, hopeful part of me still wanted a version of this where the marriage survived, and Ethan got his childhood back intact. I told him what I'd learned. I asked him to explain it to me himself, honestly, before anyone else got further involved. He told me I didn't understand business. He told me Marcus Delacroix was some retired guy my father paid to find a problem, because that's what forensic accountants do. They find problems. That's the job, he told me. And this is the part that finally, completely, broke something in me, that I should be grateful he provided for this family the way a man is supposed to, and that a few aggressive but legal deductions were nothing compared to what I'd have if I'd married someone who couldn't build a company at all. My hands were shaking by the end of that conversation, not from anger, or not only from anger, from the specific physical vertigo of watching a person recite a script instead of answering a question. I called Dana that night, not yet ready to file anything, just needing to understand what my options even were. She listened, and then she told me something I've held on to since. People don't usually change the story they tell about money. They change the money to fit the story they've already decided to tell about themselves. I didn't fully understand what she meant until much later, but I wrote it down on a sticky note and kept it on the fridge for a while, half hidden behind a grocery list like a small private anchor. 10 days after Marcus's visit, Ethan came home from school and told me, in the flat, careful voice he'd started using more and more, that his father had picked him up early and taken him to lunch, just the two of us, and had told Ethan over burgers that Grandpa Richard is trying to hurt our family and that Ethan should be careful what he says to Grandpa from now on. I want to be precise about what that moment did to me, because it was worse, in some ways, than the financial pattern Marcus had laid out on the kitchen table. Money is money, but Victor had sat across from an 8-year-old and started, deliberately, to recruit him into a version of events where the people trying to protect him were the threat. I called our family law attorney that afternoon. Her name is Dana Whitfield, and she'd been practicing family law in the county for 19 years, and I remember she let me finish the entire story, the cake, the party, Marcus's numbers, the lunch with Ethan, without interrupting once, and then she said very calmly, okay, I want you to start keeping a written log, dated, of anything Victor says to Ethan about the finances or about your father, going forward. Not because I don't believe you, because a judge will want more than a memory. That was the first time the word judge entered any conversation I was part of, and I remember sitting with the phone still warm against my ear afterward, understanding that whatever this was, it had officially stopped being something that could be resolved at a kitchen table. The final piece came from Priya Nair herself, the bookkeeper, who, after Marcus's outreach, and after what she later told Dana was months of feeling sick about it, voluntarily provided a set of internal messages showing that Victor had, roughly 8 months earlier, drafted and then abandoned paperwork to open a second business account that my father's convertible note wouldn't have visibility into. He hadn't gone through with it. But he drafted it, dated it, saved it, and then, 3 weeks after my father's investment review letter landed on the kitchen table, reopened the draft and started filling it in again. Dana called that consciousness of the problem. Marcus, more bluntly, called it someone building an exit before anyone officially confronted him. I sat with all of it. The cake, the iPad, the three $10,000, the lunch, the half-built escape hatch of an account, and I finally let myself see the whole shape of it at once, instead of one bearable piece at a time. It wasn't really about money at all, and it was also completely about money. It was about a man who needed to be the only source of anything good in a room, and who couldn't tolerate his own son getting something small and unearned, a $26 cake freely given, because Victor's entire sense of himself depended on generosity being a performance he controlled, aimed wherever it would earn him the loudest applause. Everything happened fast after that, in the way things do once the machinery of institutions actually engages instead of just circling. My father formally called the note, not reviewed it this time, called it in full, citing a covenant breach tied to the undisclosed personal expense pattern Marcus had documented, which under the terms of the original agreement gave him the right to demand immediate repayment or convert his position into a controlling equity stake. Reyes Meridian did not have $7.5 million in liquid reserves. Reyes Meridian, it turned out, barely had operating cash for the next quarter, something Marcus's audit made clear had been quietly true for almost a year, hidden behind the same reclassified expenses that had paid for a leased BMW and a wristwatch. Victor tried for about 2 weeks to find replacement financing. I know this because Dana's discovery process later surfaced his outreach to no fewer than 4 other investors, all of whom, once they ran their own diligence and found Marcus's report waiting for them, because forensic accountants, it turns out, talk to each other, and reputations in that world travel fast, declined within days. The company's board, a 3-person body that had mostly rubber-stamped Victor's decisions for a decade, voted him out as CEO on a Thursday. Priya Nair, the bookkeeper, testified at that board meeting. Voluntarily, Marcus told me later, though clearly not without real fear about what it might cost her professionally. She walked the board through 18 months of reclassified expenses using the same folder Marcus had first shown me at my own kitchen table. And according to Marcus, the deciding board member, a quiet minority investor who'd said almost nothing in 10 years of meetings, asked exactly one question before the vote: did any of this touch client funds? Priya said no. He said that was the only mercy Victor would be getting that day, and voted to remove him. I found out because Ethan's school called that same afternoon, a separate matter, coincidentally, and when I mentioned it to Dana that evening, almost as an aside, she told me she'd already heard, because Victor's removal had been picked up by a regional business journal, a 4-paragraph piece that used the phrase financial irregularities twice and ousted once. I filed for divorce the following Monday. Dana filed, alongside it, for temporary sole legal custody of Ethan, citing both the documented pattern of Victor's conduct toward him, the cake incident, corroborated now by my own written log, and, unexpectedly, by a brief written statement from Victor's own sister, who'd witnessed the birthday party and later told Dana, unprompted, that she'd always felt uneasy about how Victor talked to that boy, and the lunch conversation where Victor had tried to turn Ethan against his grandfather. The custody evaluator assigned to the case, a child psychologist named Dr. Helena Ostrander, who'd been doing this specific work for nearly 15 years, spent 2 sessions with Ethan before she ever spoke to me or Victor directly. She used a sand tray in the first session, Dana explained to me afterward, a standard technique for children too young or too guarded to narrate difficult things directly, and in Ethan's version, without any prompting, he'd built a small figure standing apart from a cluster of others, closer to the edge of the tray than the center. When Dr. Ostrander asked him gently what the figure was doing, Ethan had said, waiting to see if it's safe yet. In her written report, which Dana later walked me through, line by line, at her office, she noted, in careful clinical language, that Ethan presents with a heightened startle response to raised voices and displays a learned pattern of emotional self-suppression, consistent with exposure to inconsistent or conditional parental affection. She recommended limited supervised contact with his father pending further review and full-time placement with me. Dana told me, closing the folder afterward, that reports like this one don't usually use the word waiting. She said it stuck with her too. Victor's attorney fought all of it for a while. He fought the custody recommendation. He fought the note conversion. He fought weekly, almost as a formality by the end, a subpoena Dana served for the full Reyes Meridian financial records going back 3 years. But there is a particular kind of fight that a person puts up when they no longer believe they can win it, and by the 4th month, Victor's fight had that particular exhausted shape. The last real confrontation happened not in a courtroom but over email, forwarded to me by Dana with a single line at the top. Thought you should see this. Victor had written to her directly, against his own attorney's advice apparently, a long message that swung between fury and something close to pleading, and buried in the middle of it, almost accidentally honest, was this sentence: I never meant for it to be about the cake. It was never about the cake. I read that line maybe a dozen times. I think, in his own way, he believed it. I also think it was, and remains, one of the truest sentences he ever wrote, in the sense that it wasn't about the cake at all. It was about a man who needed his son to understand that love in that house came with a price tag Victor alone got to set, and who couldn't survive the sight of that son almost getting something for $26, freely, from a mother who simply loved him. It's been 14 months. Reyes Meridian still exists, technically, under new leadership and a name that quietly dropped Reyes from the letterhead sometime last winter. My father converted his note into equity, sat on the reconstituted board for exactly long long enough to help install a CEO he actually trusted, and then, true to form, stepped back into the kind of comfortable semi-retirement he'd always preferred. One card game and one fishing trip at a time. Victor sees Ethan twice a month, supervised, at a family center with a coordinator present, per Dr. Ostrander's revised recommendation, after 6 months of good faith participation on his part. Because I want to be fair here, in the way that this kind of story rarely lets anyone be. Victor did, eventually, engage seriously with a court-ordered parenting program, and the last 2 visits Dana relayed to me sounded, by all accounts, calm and even a little warm. I don't know yet what kind of father he'll become to a teenager or an adult. I know what kind of father he was to an 8-year-old holding a bakery flyer, and I'm allowing myself to hold both of those things as possibly, eventually, true at once, without needing either one to cancel out the other. Ethan turned 9 3 weeks ago. My father flew in again. No delays this time. Present already wrapped and in hand 2 full days early, which Ethan found so funny he made my father rewrap it properly with a bow that promptly fell off twice. We had the cake. Vanilla, blue frosting, his name in white icing across the top, $26 from the same bakery, the flyer still refrigerator magneted to the fridge like a small monument to something we'd both rather forget and can't quite bring ourselves to throw away. He blew out the candles in one breath, the way kids insist on doing even when it takes them 3 tries and nobody's counting. Then he looked at the cake for a second, quiet, the same watchful quiet he's always had, and said, "This is exactly the one I wanted." I told him I knew. I'd remembered. He smiled, small and real, no flinch anywhere in it, and asked if he could have a second slice before dinner. And I said yes, obviously, of course, and watched him carry his plate to the table like it was the easiest, most unremarkable thing in the world to simply be given something and not have to brace for what it might cost him. It was the $26 in the end that told the whole story before anyone else did. It just took the rest of us a while to read it.